Good evening, football fans. This February, the month of brotherly love, the two brothers return to the scene. Welcome back to the Talk-Ons podcast, folks. I'm your host, Post Natty Clarity, with your co-host, Marcus Paidman.
Welcome to Football Hell. Also, I didn't appreciate the brotherly love comment. That was weird.
It's Valentine's month, man. Love is love, man.
No, that's not what Valentine. No. Anyways, we're already
Welcome back,
starting
folks.
extremely off topic. This is wonderful.
Yes. Welcome back. It's been a long time since we've been on here last. And between life's busyness, scheduling conflicts, and a pinch of salt, we have been away from it for a little while. We didn't keep up like we should have, but we decided to finish what we started. And we're here to talk about our review of the playoffs and the regular season in a nutshell. So there you have it. We're back, and you can't stop us. We're coming. There's no stopping it.
Okay, so we're gonna start out with a Mickey and a Trump impression.
God bless America.
Disney World is the perfect example of American capitalistic mentality.
It's beautiful. I agree. Anyway, so yeah,
Might as well go ahead and get the show on the road here.
the Talk-Ons. Here we are. All right, so what are we going to talk about first?
I guess
Thoughts
the
on the
obvious
playoff.
thing, the playoffs and the Natty.
Thoughts on the playoff and the Natty, the way it all played out. I guess we kind of have already touched on this a little bit, and I think people have mainly made their, the consensus. But did the teams that were in belong? Did the playoffs, show teams that looked the part?
Yeah, I think so. I think seeding was bad, but I think all the right teams got in.
I agree. That's how I feel about it. I think, and that was a subtopic we could touch on as far as like the seeding. I believe that we got the 12 best teams in the country in, and as
I
far
think
as like,
sorry, I think the best thing to take away from this playoff is that the 14 playoff was, in my opinion, through this showcase, even if we had those couple blowouts at the beginning, the 14 playoff is still not as good as the 12-team playoff because Ohio State would not have even made it in the 14 playoff. And they ended up sweeping the playoffs. So
that's a good point. And honestly, the way that it played out reflected perfectly. It poetically reflected the entire point of expanding the playoff, making sure that every team deserving of the playoff, every playoff worthy or national title, potential contender, every team within that category gets in and gets a
right,
chance.
because in reality, Ohio State would have been punished severely for their loss against a rival in Michigan and would have been knocked out the playoffs because of that. And then in the end of the day, they were without a
They
doubt
were
by
head and
by
shoulders above the rest.
by the end of November, when it came time to play those conference championships and the playoffs, they were by far the better team. So
Ohio State unlocked their potential. They woke up. Basically, they had awakened the beast within. And I'm pretty sure I had mentioned it in like our first episode or an earlier episode. I had picked Ohio State to win the Natty. My original prediction for the matchup was Ohio State and Georgia, and Ohio State was going to take it. That was my original prediction. Well, Georgia didn't necessarily fulfill my prediction, but Ohio State, of course, they blew everybody out of the water. They took it.
um,
They were a cut above. We were sitting here talking about Oregon being head and shoulders above the rest all season, and I just didn't really see it. Ohio State, honestly, they. I
I mean,
had a
well,
feeling it only took
Ohio State
Ohio State.
didn't give any reason to think they were head and shoulders above the rest of the country. They didn't give any reason to
Well,
believe that
right,
until the playoffs, which I guess obviously that's the only time it really matters, which is why this 12-team playoff is so important because some teams just find their
exactly.
stride later in the season, and you know, um, so Ohio State was one of them.
I think the
Notre
roster, it
Dame,
was just
I
like the.
mean, Notre Dame still went 11-1, and they still would have made the actual playoffs, I'm sure. But
And as far as Ohio State goes, to finish the thought is, I mean, on paper, like the roster and the coaching staff kind of was like they had the perfect formula going for them. So, which is why I pretty much gave them their props from the get go. Oregon played a damn good season. I'm not trying to take anything away from Oregon, but I early on saw some holes, saw some weaknesses, and I knew that they were a beatable team. Um, and teams at that elite caliber like Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame this year, teams like that I knew had a good chance of beating Oregon. And well, we saw what happened. Now, as far as their early matchup with Ohio State, a lot of people say it was unfair. I don't think that's really a logical argument because if you are the better national championship team, it doesn't matter who when you play who in the bracket, you're either better or you're not. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? So that's my stance on that as far as when Oregon was put against Ohio State.
I mean, yeah, you gotta beat them to go forward. I mean, the thing is that it's Oregon got obliterated though. That's the difference is that Oregon got absolutely manhandled by Ohio
And that's the
State.
only reason they're saying it's unfair is because of how bad Oregon got beat. It's like, oh, they had to play the same team twice. Like, okay, well, Georgia played the same team twice, and we have almost the same story both times. So, you know, um, I mean, yes, beating the same team twice, especially at an elite caliber, is difficult. But if you are the national championship team that you say you are, you know, I don't know, because maybe it's like a numbers game. You take two teams that are at the same level and you pit them against each other within a certain sample size. You might get a win, loss, win,
Well,
loss
that's
between the
kind of my
two. So
point with Oregon and Ohio State is that I don't agree with that argument here because of how badly Oregon got beat that second game. You
right,
know, Ohio State played them in a neutral site, and you and me agreed that Ohio State beats Oregon in a neutral site because of how they played in Eugene.
I didn't think it'd be that
Obviously, I
bad,
was gonna
but
say I didn't think it'd be 35-7 at half or whatever it was. It was terrible. It was really, really bad. Um, the only team that really struck me as a true true competition to Ohio State, funny enough, was Texas, even though Notre Dame was the one in the national championship. Notre Dame kind of had a little bit of a comeback, but they still got down like 3 or 4 scores to Ohio State at one point. And I just don't think that's, necessarily all that great of an indication because it was just too hard. It was like when Georgia got down against Alabama in that game, it was like
too far
it was just
behind at that
it was
point.
too big of a gap,
And that's
or
important
at least it
to
was.
mention. If you
I guess
don't
it
have
wasn't too
well,
big of a gap because Georgia did actually come back and take the lead, but
but the difference being is the offensive to defensive matchup. Notre Dame's offense was not high powered enough to make
yeah,
that kind of comeback against that Ohio State defense. They just weren't. Notre Dame's
it was just
defense is damn good, but their
well, and
offense just was never good enough.
they struggled against Ohio State most of that game, and to be honest, I don't want to take anything from Notre Dame because they were a great team. I know if you've watched this show that we have kind of been Notre Dame doubters. I
Let's just
think
go ahead and get it out the
I
way.
think sometimes for good reason, sometimes for not good reason. Uh,
Historical
my
bias,
my
but
biggest issue is historical bias, but then again, though, it's just the fact that my biggest issue with Notre Dame was not that I didn't think they were a good team. It's like I've said before, it was that you couldn't truly tell. They proved at the end that they were a good team, but you still couldn't truly tell until the playoffs because of the mediocre schedule they had played. And that's what I just talk about is that Notre Dame is too elite of a school to be playing, Navy or Army as their best game out of the schedule. So or playing A&M first game of the season or whatever.
It's
That's
the
my
the
biggest qualm with
consistent,
Notre Dame.
yeah. It's the consistent premature glaze that Notre Dame gets every season. And the only reason we feel so strongly about it and have expressed that in our show is because we get the same story every season. Now, granted, I had a feeling maybe they would show us up this season because, I mean, yes, you can't gauge a season to season team's worth based on, historical premise. It is this season is what it is in the here and now. And Notre Dame was one of the best teams in the country. Not
That's where
taking
my
that away
name is
from them.
rooted from too,
So,
because I respect Marcus Freeman for coming in as the next Notre Dame coach and sort of trying. It's just one season, so I'm not going to sit here and because I've talked about before in previous episodes that I don't like jumping to conclusions. He's definitely going to get paid big. That's the point of the name, is that because he is a good coach and he's already taken him to a national championship. So, but I don't want to sit here and say that the Notre Dame thing, like the whole emphasis over Notre Dame about because they still had a bad schedule. This time they were just actually able to produce. Granted, they in the playoffs they did play a Georgia team that was down to their backup quarterback and also has one of the worst offensive coaching systems they've had in 6 years. So, and that's something we'll
and let me
talk about in another
interject.
episode.
I was going to say, I will interject that we are going to do because we've already disclosed we're Georgia fans, we're going to do a Georgia specific episode on reviewing and grading the season for the Georgia Bulldogs, what they did right, what they did wrong, blase, blase. So, but that'll
But
be a separate episode.
to go to that game, if you take a look at it, you take away that return touchdown from Notre Dame. The only actual offensive touchdown they scored against Georgia was the one at the very end of the first half where Georgia fumbled the ball. So I think what I'm getting at is that I just didn't think Notre Dame was good enough to win a national championship, and obviously they weren't. I just thought that Ohio State was a cut above. No matter how the game ended up, I think Notre Dame had a championship tier defense, but their offense was terrible. Their offense was bad too. I'm just going to say it outright. Their offense was not great. They
I mean, that was, and I mean,
barely
we
had
had
a
already,
passing game. Riley Leonard had a couple good passing games, but
he
it
got
wasn't good
better,
enough. It wasn't good enough to be elite and win a national
right?
championship.
He
And
got better, but he
so the
wasn't good
fact that
enough
Notre
by
Dame
the end.
got so far behind Ohio State, then had to rely on their offense to really make a big deal. I think they got within a score, I'm pretty sure, but I mean, it was already down to the last minute of the game by that point. So it just so my biggest takeaway from this is that get rid of the seeding because a lot of teams that were in the top four shouldn't have been in the top four. Funny enough, I know it sounds crazy, but I don't think Georgia belonged in the top four this time.
I mean, well, I mean, the precedent was set for them to be there. We only feel that way because of how it played out after the fact.
Well,
So
yeah, they
hindsight 2020, but they earned their spot on the top four.
well
But
based on what, but that's what I'm saying is that
reseeding is a very important concept.
reseeding or just not involving anything with conference championships, like being the reason, like maybe give a different thing for maybe just give home field advantage to conference champions. Don't actually give like a seeding advantage, just give like home field advantage. I think that's maybe logical.
Yeah, but
So
then it's like, but then you have the other teams that get home field advantage, and then you ask the question, well, what makes it worth being the conference champion? It's all been a question of, okay, how do we reward the conference champions for winning their conference? That's the big issue here. But
well, I mean, that's what I'm saying is that if you win it, you get a guaranteed home field advantage, even with somebody. I think it's guaranteed home field advantage. So even if you're playing somebody who's seated above you, you would still get home field advantage over them because you're a conference champion. So it would still make it, it's still incentivized because I'm just what I'm saying is like no matter what, you get home field advantage. So winning your conference and just winning games in general is, an incentive.
I mean, the
But
seeding could definitely use some work. I mean, I think the 12 team format is definitely better. I think we're going to see, I think every team that deserved a chance got a chance. And as you mentioned earlier, if it hadn't been for the 12 team playoff, the rightful national championship team wouldn't have been in the playoff if we still had the 4-team playoff. So
There's no
know.
way that you can make every conference championship matter. There's just not, because I mean, no matter what,
Well,
nobody's going to respect the Big 12 champion, or maybe a little
and
bit
and
this year
Arizona
because
State, props to Arizona State. They definitely belong there. And I think everybody agrees Arizona State belonged in that playoff and they played damn good. And, you know, Scattaboo, I mean, that guy probably should have been the Heisman winner, but I digress. I mean, that Arizona State played damn good. They deserve to be there. But yes, as you said, I mean, at the end of the day, winning the Big 12 is just nowhere near the same as winning the SEC or winning the Big 10, which conference performances are kind of a big topic right now, because we're SEC homers more or less, and we've talked about this before. But obviously, in objective honesty and modesty, we have to admit the SEC just wasn't the king this season. The Big Ten played better football. I think the SEC and Big Ten were still 1-2, or Big Ten 1, SEC 2. I think they were two. Both of those were set apart from the rest of the conferences in their own right, but the Big Ten definitely had it this year. The Big Ten was playing better football, and I think the biggest difference was the Big Ten was better coached. The Big Ten had better coaches, better coaching, and coaching staff.
yeah.
Their teams were playing more disciplined, fundamental football. The Big Ten was playing fundamentally better football. The
Yes.
SEC was very talented, but they were poorly coached. They weren't playing good football. Big Ten was playing the best football. They just were.
Offense was a major struggle for every SEC team this season.
Yeah.
Georgia had some of the worst offensive coaching you could ever think of in your entire life. Same thing with Texas.
That one.
Which, speaking of, same thing with Texas. Offensive coaching was lackluster for Texas. Quarterback play wasn't the greatest, but that can also be attributed to poor coaching, which is what I think happened with Georgia.
The SEC has been entering a
Alabama.
coaching vacuum the past couple of years. Like
Alabama
the
just had a
standard
new
of
head
coaching has
coach.
lowered. And
Alabama just had a new
was,
head coach, so they were doomed from the start. And then on top of that, they had Jalen Milroe, which I'm going to continue to say right now is the most overrated quarterback in the country. You can hate me for saying that all you want to, but he is, and it showed. He's not a good quarterback. He's a hell of an athlete, but he's not a good quarterback.
I agree. And we said that from the get go. Maybe not as bluntly and harshly, because there were still some questions to be answered. But yeah, from the moment Milroe stepped on that field, there's always faith and benefit of doubt that the players will get better and develop. But Milroe never got better as a quarterback, as a passer. He just was never that good. He was mid. So it is what it is.
I would be very surprised if Jalen Milroe gets drafted anything higher than third round to actually be a quarterback. So, anyways, though, so
he'll probably be an RPO backup for some team.
South Carolina coaching was back and forth with them. They struggled very early on. Had they actually played to their potential at the beginning of the season, they probably would have been in the playoffs. Similar situation with Ole Miss, except Ole Miss was the flip side. They collapsed at the end of the season where they lost to Florida, and they got beat by Kentucky at home. It was just, the SEC just. It's hard to say because the Big Ten, the upper echelon of the Big Ten was miles ahead of even the upper echelon of the SEC. But the Big Ten as a whole wasn't all that great. The Big Ten had what? Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. Who else was like really showing out in the Big Ten as
Illinois
well?
proved to be a really good team. They beat South Carolina.
Yeah.
Michigan, I mean, they beat Alabama, but I don't take that much into account because
I'm going to be honest.
Matchup. It was Milroe versus
matchup.
Michigan's defense. It's a bad matchup. I don't think Michigan was really all that, honestly.
But
no, I mean, it is funny you say that because I noticed that it was ironic. The SEC as a whole underperformed, and more specifically, the top level of the SEC, underperformed, was underwhelming. But the middle downwards still was somehow better than the middle downwards of every other conference, including the Big Ten. That was the weird part about it. I think overall the Big Ten was still playing better football this year. Um, Now, obviously, we got sports media. Everybody's all, it's a sensationalism. Everybody's claiming the SEC is falling. The SEC's days
Yeah,
are
you've
over.
got the SEC dominance is over. It's
It's
like, I
one
mean,
season.
guys, it's like 2 seasons technically in a row, even though, like, yeah,
I
Michigan
mean,
won it
well,
last
the
year.
thing
The
about it
SEC
is
was still the
last year,
best conference overall
right?
last
The
season.
SEC was still the best, and last year, I mean, let's be real. The only reason Michigan was able to get where they were was because Georgia got snubbed. But hate me if you want. That's a different
Yeah,
conversation
but
for
we've
another
talked about it
day.
before because I know a lot
But
of people want to say, oh, well, Michigan beat Alabama and Alabama beat Georgia. Bama was a better matchup for Georgia that season. It was the same thing as like Michigan brought the house down in most of their season when they played Georgia in the playoffs last time. But again, Georgia was just a way better matchup for Michigan than any other team they played, and that's why
and
it
the
ended up in a
difference
blowout.
maker and the difference maker between Michigan versus Alabama last season and Michigan, if they had played Georgia, is Georgia had a much more capable offense than Alabama.
Well, Georgia
Uh,
had a true pocket passing threat with
and I mean honestly, and Georgia also had a better defense too, maybe
a
by
better
an edge or
receiving
two. But
core as well than Bama. It was
I
just
mean,
that
Georgia was a better matchup for
Nick
Michigan last
Saban,
season.
we've said it
And
before, and we always will say it. As Georgia fans, you have to accept it. Nick Saban just always had Kirby Smart's number. He always knew how
yeah,
to go into that game and have a prep. I don't think any other coach really can do that. I think this season, Marcus Freeman probably was the first coach to actually have Kirby Smart's number in an actual like, and that's the reason. Like that was the real big
yeah.
reason
I mean,
because he
all props to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman because he stuck to what was working and he capitalized on Georgia's mistakes because I will say I think Georgia it was half and half. I think Notre Dame played 50% part in beating Georgia, but Georgia played 50% part in beating
Well,
themselves.
yeah, but Marcus Freeman also had a game plan that was built around them beating themselves, such as the whole like trick play, fake punt, like offsides thing that he did to draw Georgia
Which
offsides,
I
which they
mean,
did,
in a
and also
strategic in a strategic sense, pretty brilliant on his part to realize that hey, the only way to beat Georgia is to capitalize when Georgia messes up.
special teams as
That's
well. Their special
yeah.
teams was better coached. Another reason he got
Georgia
outcoached.
has to
Marcus
beat
Freeman.
themselves to, capitalize on that. I mean, it was a brilliant game plan. I mean, yeah, Marcus Freeman, he concocted a brilliant game plan.
And I guess
I think
Lane
Georgia still could have won
Kiffin,
that game, but
Lane Kiffin and Kalen DeBoer did beat them, but I don't really think. I think that's a little bit different of a story because I really think that those guys just kind of sat behind their desks for months at a time studying to prep for Georgia.
I mean,
So, but
home field
anyways,
advantage makes a big difference too. But enough about Georgia.
yes.
Point is I don't necessarily count last season. Last season I feel is kind of neutral because an SEC powerhouse got snubbed and we were still in the 4-team playoff. This is the first year of the 12-team playoff. I mean, it's one season that the SEC wasn't the best and the Big Ten was. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more of a level playing field between the Big Ten and SEC moving forward. But I don't think we're going to see the script flip to where the Big Ten is now the new dominant and SEC is falling. It's one season. That's not how that's going to work. Because let's be real, like the talent pipeline is still in the SEC, and most of those top talents are still going to SEC programs. So
Well,
NIL and transfer portal plays a big part, but
I think the biggest part of everything here with like the playoff and why people are jumping so much on the SEC train is because obviously it's one of those things where it's like we always talk about like with Georgia fans. I'll bring Georgia up again, but just because it's a common thing, is that it was big in the thing that oh, you just want to be Alabama, and it's like we win a second national championship. Georgia fans are getting hyped up, but then it's always the you're not Bama, or stop trying to be Bama, or Georgia fans trying to. That's what it is. Is that I'm not gonna lie, being an SEC homer, yeah, I kind of want to point the finger and laugh because that's what this is. It's like, oh, you win a national champ, you win 2 in a row, and now you want to sit here and point fingers and say, so that's how badly these teams want to try and get the SEC. That's how you know the SEC has always been dominant because two playoffs in a row that aren't won by the SEC, and boom, SEC dominance is gone, and they just want to keep hammering that down. Sorry, guys, that's not how
Sore
football
winners
works.
is what you're
That's not how,
saying.
that's not how football works. Football is a multi-season sport.
Yeah.
Let's give it the past 18 championships, I believe, have been won. The past 16 of the last 18 championships, as far as I know, have been won by an SEC team. I think that's like the actual fact. And or maybe it's the last 14 of 18, and the last six of the last 8 have been won by SEC teams. And it was 3 different SEC teams too:
Right.
LSU, Bama, and Georgia. So it hasn't
I mean,
just been
yeah,
dominance by one team.
Saban's Alabama being the best program and coach of all time, you know, yes, kind of boosted the SEC's repertoire, kind of was the outlier.
There's been
But as
three
you
SEC.
said,
There's been 3
yes,
SEC only national championships. That's the only conference to have ever done that. So I don't really understand where we get this idea that SEC dominance is just not there anymore. Look, it's not here now at this moment. But
and this
until
season
SEC
it wasn't.
dominance is definitely gone, or that a new team, like, come on, let's give it some time. Like I said with Colorado, I want them to be a great team. I want Deion Sanders to be the right pick for them, but they've had one good season under Deion. Give it some time, because people always want to bring up the fact that, oh well, they were 1-11 and then he made them 4-8. That's a 300% increase or 400% increase, and then he's like, oh well, let's and then he goes 10-2 the next season, or 9-3 or whatever, and say, oh, this, see, I told you, turn around. Okay, well, Colorado went from going, I think they went literally like I think they went like 4-8 one season to 5-7, then to 10-3 one season, and then they went right back to 5-7. Give us some time. Let Deion have consistently good seasons. Well, give us some time. Let the SEC not be dominant for the next few seasons, and then we can say the dominance of the SEC is over. It has been 2 seasons, guys. Give it some time. Let's let things, because yes, I'm sorry, as an SEC homers and people who are around SEC homers, all you're doing is just making us laugh, because it's like, oh, this is how badly you want to be the SEC.
It was really a problem. It really bothered you that
Yeah,
much.
it really bothers you
I
that
mean,
much
I
because you hear
understand a
this,
lot
but
of people. A
but I
lot of
get it.
people, it's for frustration out of the media always glazing the SEC, and the rankings they claim are overrated towards the SEC, and it's like a
Yeah,
frustration of that. They feel like it was SEC bias was kind of
yeah.
screwing with rankings and screwing with other programs' chances and stuff like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, this season, the way it played out, doesn't prove, as you said, the last 14 of 18 titles and the way things played out invalid. It doesn't prove all of that invalid. There was still a precedent. There was still a logical precedent to that. And that's the reality of it. So, but SEC had a down year. We got ebbs and flows. I mean, it's life, it's
The
reality. It's not
SEC
going
is
to be the
still the
same
most
thing
dominant conference of the
whenever.
21st century, and there's no way you
It,
can
yeah,
deny
and that's going to
that.
be that way for a long time.
Well, I was about to say it's going to take, I believe, probably 15 more championships for them to, or no,
Right.
11 more
Yeah,
championships
that's what
for
I'm
them to
saying.
get to that point.
That's going to be
So,
the precedent and for a
and then,
long
like I said,
time.
there's other things like multiple championships where they've had 2 teams from the same conference, such as, the SEC had LSU versus Bama in a national championship, Georgia versus Bama in an SEC in a national championship. So, it's just, I think it's just cool. But I also get it, because there was a big thing with this playoff, the 12-team playoff. I think a lot of people are wanting to jump on it and laugh at SEC homers, because there were a lot of people talking that, oh, well, now you expand it to 12 teams, you're going to have 8 SEC teams, battling or whatever. And that was not the case. There's only 3 SEC teams in the playoffs. So,
One
you
of them
know,
didn't even really count because they were a newbie. They weren't really a vetted, established SEC programs. They didn't really count anyway. But
so, but
I mean, the point is the SEC cannibalized itself. And honestly, the sad part is not because they were the best. That's the saddest part. They cannibalized themselves because they just weren't that great.
they
And these teams,
cannibalize themselves because they set up schedules in which all the teams
right?
that were good, not just great, but
all the
good,
top
played
teams
each
were
other.
playing each other and beating each other
It's
up.
like
So
what's funny is that, and that's what really screwed up the SEC. Is because it's funny because honestly the SEC's only hope of like pure like greatness this season, I guess, was Texas. Texas made it the furthest, and did they? Yeah, they made it the furthest out of SEC teams. They were the only ones to actually make it to the semifinals, and they had the best regular season record wise. But then again, though, Georgia came stomping through and took their, you know, bye week away and their, that advantage and stuff, and so hurt them. So it just the SEC really messed itself up, and I guess maybe that's a testament to the SEC is that it's like, it was just such a competitive conference this season that they just beat each other up. And I'm going to say that can also kind of play a part in the postseason because they struggled a lot more to that path, to actually get there to the playoffs. But the SEC cannibalized itself, yes. Also, I just don't know what Sankey was thinking with the way that he just scheduled everything. I'm going to be real. I feel like Georgia was always your best hope to get into the national championship, and yet you gave them that kind of schedule. So,
I mean, they still did what they needed to do, get in the top 4. So at this point, it didn't really matter. I mean, it made it harder for Georgia, but they still got where they were supposed to get.
yeah, but
They just got beat.
with injuries and had, Mike Bobo
But
had
that
went
is
through his
true.
Mike
That
Bobo had,
schedule screwed them up,
Mike Bobo had went
beat
through
them
his
up.
4 plays, that he has recorded in his playbook. So,
I mean, look,
but
I know why Sankey did what he did. And we talked about this off the record, but now it's on the record. Sankey did what he did because he was trying to make the SEC look more favorable, more desirable for newcomers because they're already in the works for a super league, which I guess we can talk about that now.
yeah, let's move on to that.
The super league is going to happen. We're already in the works for the super league. Sankey set it up the way he did. Him and his crew did that on purpose to make it easier for Texas because he knew how good they were going to be, to make it easier for first year newcomer to the SEC Texas to get where they got. That was set up. That was intentional because he was trying the plan. And my theory is the only thing that makes sense is the plan was to stifle Georgia, who was the status quo for SEC dominance at that point, stifle the status quo of the SEC, the dominant team, make it harder on them and make it easier on the newcomer who has the most potential to win the Natty, which was Texas. Oklahoma
Yeah,
wasn't really there yet.
well, we say that. I don't necessarily
Texas, they
agree with
did
that,
that,
though.
but I'm saying that's my theory that they did that to make it more desirable for potential newcomers. Like, hey, if you come to the SEC, we'll hook you up and you'll get a better shot at the playoff path.
I
You know what
see.
I mean?
I don't agree because I know what you're trying to say.
Because
But if you're
he's
gonna
fighting.
do that,
He's
do
trying
that
to
with
fight
both
that.
teams.
He's trying to fight that competitive narrative, though. He's trying to fight that.
Okay, but Oklahoma came in and had one of the hardest schedules in the country and got absolutely obliterated. So, like,
I
that's
mean, I
kind of
guess they was trying to find a balance. Like, hey, we'll, you got a good shot, but this is still the SEC. I think they were trying to find a balance of how to still make the SEC look tough and competitive, but
I
also make
think
it look desirable and plausible for newcomers. And also, he
I
was
think he literally just
trying to
made
take
it.
Kirby down. He was trying to take Kirby out. He
I
was.
think it was
I mean, I don't
literally
like to
just
create that
because
conspiracy
he's
theory.
trying to get on Texas's good side
He
because they're
didn't
the
want
richest school in the
Georgia.
country.
Yes, he didn't want NIL, all of that. That's a good point. But he didn't want Georgia in that SEC championship. He didn't because he wanted to give Texas the easiest path possible. Maybe it was Texas specific, as you said, because it's Texas, richest school in the country, the NIL, what have you. I guess it could have been Texas specific. Yes. Point is that they set Kirby and the Dogs up to fail, and they set Texas up to succeed. But
Anyways, though, to go to the next topic that we initially started, talked about the Super League. Now that we had a 12-team playoff and we looked at how it went, do we think a Super League is the Super Leagues where it was just Big Ten and SEC at this point? Do we think that's a good idea? And
I think it's the only way to go at this point.
I was about to say, I think when you build a playoff this large, it's kind of the only way you can go. And I don't know if we've talked about this in a previous episode, but I know for a fact we've talked about this off the record, where the idea is that we always talk about this team when we talk bring Notre Dame back up about the schedule. Oh, how do you know this team's actually that good? You compare schedules. If you have a super league, you have two super leagues, the scheduling no longer becomes a problem. It's much easier to compare schedules then.
Yep.
It's no longer about
Gauging
that.
gauging strength of schedule. Yeah.
It's just
And we
you're all in the
mentioned that.
same conference. You're all playing relatively the same opponents or other opponents that have played similar opponents. So, it's just it kind of you're still going to have that issue because that also happens in the NFL where some teams, just because of how things are laid out, some teams just have slightly easier schedules. But if you're in a super league, they're all the same conference, they're all kind of feeding off the same thing. It's still much easier, I think. It's still easier because at the end of the day, without a guarantee, you're somehow going to be playing somebody that is worth something, and you have a way to prove that if you're all in a conference. So I think super leagues with a 12-team playoff is probably the way to go. So
Yeah, we did mention that on our last episode. I think one of our previous episodes we mentioned strength of schedule and how to gauge who the best teams really are based on strength of record and schedule and who they play and how you play them. And obviously having all these different conferences, and once again, not every conference is built the same. The Big 10 and the SEC are way set apart from the rest of the conferences right now. So it's way harder to gauge teams and how good they really are and whether they belong in the top 12 when they're playing in the Big 12 or they're playing in the ACC or one of the group of fives, Yeah, I mean, I think now that we're here, and I mean, it's probably going to happen anyway. They probably already got their minds made up in the works. I think the Super League is the best way to go because now with a Super League, as you said, with two separate conferences, like only two separate ones, the big conferences, everybody's playing mostly everybody. It's a lot easier to get, like, it brings a standard to levels of competition. It makes it easier to have reference points and makes it easier to gauge who's playing who's good, who's not, what schedules are difficult, what schedules aren't. Because I will say, okay, yeah, the 12-team playoff worked out this year. They selected the 12 best teams in the country this year, but that's only because the SEC cannibalized itself. What would have happened if the SEC hadn't fell apart and more SEC teams had better records and better performances over the season? Then we would have hit a roadblock because then they would have been having to pick and choose between a lot of different teams. And obviously people would have been, there would have been a lot of uproar because they probably would have picked a lot of SEC teams because of strength of schedule implications and things like that. In that scenario where the SEC hadn't fallen apart and it would have been the standard SEC.
I
But
don't know, because the thing with the top 12 playoff is that I don't think that the lower half was the problem, picking the lower half. I think the reason I say that the best teams got in is because there's only a few best teams. You had Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas. I think the top four were the best top four that got in. And that was the
but
good thing, is that
with like
those
teams
top
like
four wouldn't have been the top four. Well, I
well,
guess
like Notre
Texas probably
like
would have.
teams like Notre Dame and Indiana, like if let's say Ole Miss and South Carolina had done way better, had better records. If they had better records, they have played better throughout the season. Now you got Notre Dame, Indiana, South Carolina, Ole Miss. Now you got to pick between those, like two out of those four. It makes it a lot more complicated and makes it
I
more
don't
difficult.
see.
And Notre Dame probably would have got the boot because of their schedule. But see, with
They're
the
not
Super
they're not the
League,
best team, so that's what I'm saying. I don't think that even if they wouldn't have lost, if even if they would have kept a better schedule or like better record for Ole Miss or South Carolina, I don't think they would have been the best teams. What I'm trying to say is, like, I don't really think it's that big of a deal who gets in the lower half unless it's teams that need to actually get in, because Notre Dame's definitely making it in over them, I promise you. Also, like, at the end of the day, you just got to make sure expanding it. The only thing that's expanding it is important of is just to make sure that those upper four, because that was the problem with the playoff, is that you probably only in college football, yeah, you probably only need 4 or 5 teams good enough to go into the playoffs and really hash it out. As you could tell, like really the best games, most of the best games came from the top four, came from the semifinals. But the thing is that that's all you need, that expanded playoff, is just to make sure that you get that 5th or 6th other team in that's going to make it, such as like Notre Dame or Ohio State in this case, because obviously like Ohio State wouldn't have made it in the top 4.
I mean,
But
yeah, the
at the end of the
point
day, the
is
top 4 or 5 teams were still the best teams, and we're
I
still,
mean,
you
yeah,
know,
the point is to make
on
sure that
another
you get
level.
have enough room to get all the best teams in. Nobody gets snubbed, to make sure you get all playoff worthy teams in. But I mean, if we're gonna make a 12-team playoff and claim that those 12 teams are playoff worthy, then there's still going to be a selection process involved in that, and difficulties when running into when in cases where more teams have better records. My point is gauging who to pick over who based on strength of schedule and strength of record. That would be hella convoluted and hard to do in the scenario I mentioned earlier because of all the different conferences and Notre Dame being an independent and not being able to gauge the schedules for real.
That's
Whereas
why
with
they
the
need a
Super
super
League,
league, is so Notre Dame can finally just get in a dang conference.
also that, then we wouldn't have as much of an issue with like independence and Notre Dame, engineering their schedule and staying independent solely for the purpose of having control over their schedule to benefit them. Nobody's stupid. We know that's what they're doing. Um, I mean, I will say maybe it's 50-50, maybe 50% they're, holding on to a tradition of staying independent. But the reality, like of it is the more swaying thing is the fact that they get to control their own schedule, and that's
I
the
think the
main
biggest
thing.
thing though with the Super League is that yes, it just gets rid of that whole like narrative of like, oh well, this team's played this, so it's like it just makes it much harder to actually compare schedules. And at that point, it just kind of makes it pretty obvious that hey, maybe the teams who just have the best records are the ones that should be in. You know?
I mean, and all the differences in conference competition and levels of conferences. Yeah, that's the thing. As you just said, sometimes an 11-1 team or even an undefeated team is not one of the top four or one of the best teams in the country because they got that record off of a weak, maybe let's say group of 5 conference schedule. But as we were talking about, if you're playing in a super conference where all that competition is mixed together and you got an 11-1 record or especially undefeated, it's more easy to claim that as an objective scheduling, like win-loss record. It makes a win-loss record. It makes the numbers, as we've always talked about, contesting like that straw man of the numbers in the win-loss column. It gives that more credibility and more weight because now the the context of where those numbers were gained is based off of a conglomerate standard, like a
Yeah.
more set standard. Um, I mean, obviously, conferences are cool. We like conferences. We like conference rivalries. We like regional rivalries. I mean, I think we'll still have regional rivalries even with super conferences because it's like, okay,
Yeah, I mean, regional rivalries are specific to the region.
all right, it's like, okay, we have two regions of the US in the same super conference. It's like, all right, well, bragging rights for which region of the US wins that conference or does better in
Well,
that
it's just
conference.
it's always
I
been
mean,
about, especially you think about Georgia Tech. It's just whatever team's best in Georgia. They're just trying to prove which team's the
yeah.
better team in Georgia right now. Same thing with Bama and Auburn. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, which kind of sucks that Bedlam was, they got rid of Bedlam, but um, Texas at Oklahoma, that's kind of like the Midwest rivalry.
I mean,
So
the the NIL, the transfer portal, all of these ideas of I mean, yes, the college football is becoming a cash cow. And is that problematic in some ways? Yes. Is some ways it can be a good thing for the players in certain circumstances. I do think there definitely need to be more regulations on transfer portal and probably NIL
my
precedent.
thing is
But
just the vibe has really shifted, and maybe I'm just speaking a little too like, you know, illogical, but you could definitely tell that there was like a shift in the vibe this season. Things just felt really
sorry.
different.
I'd plug up a charger.
teams, players in general seem like they just didn't really play as hard,
I mean, it
didn't
does
give as
change
much
the culture of
effort.
college football because with the NIL and transfer portal, what you're getting now is everybody wants to be a starter. Everybody wants to start out a starter, and it completely changes the culture and mindset of college football players. It really does.
There's
I think
just
people
little
can
growth too. I just don't really see players growing, over these past couple years with the NIL because it just, again, I'm going to say this as well. Maybe things will change. Maybe it's just a consequence of the current couple years we're in, and things
adjustments,
change, and it
maybe.
won't.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just adjustments. But it is slowly trending in the direction where I think teams are playing, where players are not giving as much effort anymore to actually, because yes, it's like as soon as you think your job's getting taken, they're transferring. They're not actually trying to compete and make each other better. They're immediately transferring to the next school. I mean, look at that. Like Gunnar Stockton ends up looking pretty good for Georgia, and instead of Beck realizing, dang, I need to kick it into high gear, and keep this starting position. No, he goes to Miami. Granted, there was a little bit more of a other reason, like his girlfriend and all were there. But I mean, let's not act like the $4 million they offered him didn't sound very nice to him either.
Well, I think
So
it was because, I'm gonna give Beck the benefit of the doubt. I'm gonna play devil's advocate here because let's be honest. If you had a season like he did, he's planning on going to the NFL and being an NFL caliber quarterback. If you had the season that you did, and majority of the reason that you ended up having the type of season that you did this year, a wishy-washy down season, is because of your receiving core, the receiver
yeah,
coaches, and the offensive coordinator, would you stay at that school if they were keeping that staff? I wouldn't stay. I'd transfer. I don't blame
it's
Beck for
the same,
transferring.
but they
I'm
picked up a
not.
bunch of receivers in the transfer portal. So,
Okay,
but
but I'm not. I mean, Beck obviously was
I
frustrated
get
with Bobo's system. He obviously was, and I don't blame him. But I mean, also, yeah, a lot of factors probably played into it, and the money, and him trying to go somewhere, I guess, where he knew he was going to have a better shot at padding his stats for his NFL draft year. I guess. I guess because he wants to go somewhere where he's guaranteed to start again, so he can make sure that he's got plenty of play time to pad his stats for the NFL draft. Because yes, Gunner is going to be that dude. I've been saying it, and I can't wait to see it. Um, I'm rooting for him at least. He looks like he's going to
I
be a
hope
good
so.
quarterback, but
I think he's going to be good, but Bobo
bad
is
coaching can definitely
just,
throw that in the toilet. So we'll
and
see.
our receiver coaches I'm worried about because I don't know what the heck happened to that receiving core this season. Anyways,
Yeah, we'll talk about that on our Georgia
yeah,
specific episode.
there's not really much
Um,
else I think that needs to be covered. We covered the Super League this episode, so um, why don't we maybe figure out maybe one last topic and we can actually finally make good timing on a podcast episode.
well, was
So
there anything else as far as like regular
I mean,
season in a nutshell? Any topics on the regular season or the bowl season?
I don't think so. I think really the biggest like takeaway was, I think we kind of connected our biggest takeaway from the regular season to the playoffs in general. So I just, no big takeaways. I think the biggest takeaway from the regular season is that, think vibes are changing. We just got to give it some time, see where things head. Are we going to really see a downpour of poor performance because of what we were just talking about, teams or players picking teams just because they want to start, and there's no competition anymore because you're not actually trying to fight for position, you're just going to start? Or is there going to be some of those strong long lasting players that really show loyalty? I think that's the biggest reason why Gunnar Stockton, I think, is probably going to be the best fit for Georgia in this case, is because he is a very loyal player, even through NIL and
right, he was
transfer
committed to the
portal and all.
culture. Yeah,
He's been committed to Georgia. He stayed there, and and maybe there were some conversations between him and Beck. Maybe he actually maybe him and Beck talked about it, and he already had a good idea that he was going to be starting at some point. But overall, I think the biggest takeaway is that, yeah, it's like is NIL, and it seems like it's shifting in the wrong direction, and let's just hope that it maybe is just a consequence of adjustments And then also that, SEC dominance, it's too early to say that it's dead. So I think that's the other biggest takeaway is because the
I think we'll
SEC
start
can
going
cannibalize
back and
itself. So
forth. I think we'll
yeah,
start going back and forth because um, right now there's, like I said earlier, a bit of a coaching vacuum in the SEC. The standard of coaching is kind of dropped, and Saban leaving the SEC. There's not a lot more Saban proteges branching out and taking over these SEC programs too, because the Saban effect is real, like the
yeah,
ripple effect he had. So there's a lot to be said there. But I think it's gonna like the NIL and transfer portal. Like transfer portal's already changed a lot. I mean, the NIL is probably going to change a lot, but I'm sure as things adjust, they'll probably start regulating some things.
yeah,
As you said about development, though, I will be curious to see how NFL rookies perform, like new NFL draftees
yeah.
start performing, like what the level, the bar they set is moving forward, being spoiled starter guys, whatever you want to call them, starting out, not having to work their way up on the roster in
Mhm.
college. That's going to be interesting. I just wonder if we'll see an effect, a noticeable
Yeah.
effect in the bar for NFL rookies.
Yeah. One thing I actually want to say that I think is a curious thing, and maybe this is a little thing, because you said something curious you're looking at going move forward. So a small thing I'm curious about about looking forward is Kalen DeBoer and how he performs his second season, because a second season is going to be a big telltale, or not a telltale, because again, I think that multiple seasons make a big deal, but you already know that if Alabama does not perform, they perform similarly next season, Bama fans are going to have a riot. I'm really curious because Kalen DeBoer has a tough schedule next season, and he has to go to South Carolina. He has to, or no, maybe they went to South Carolina this season, but either way they have games like go they have to go to Athens next year. So it's like I know he beat Kirby Smart's Georgia this past season, but he's got to go to Athens now next season. And the question is, it's like, how does he perform in this pretty tough schedule he's going to have next season as his second year head coach? So
With
that'll
that
play
being
a big
said,
part.
I think uh, I think he's going to do the same or worse, the same or maybe one game, one more loss. Bowl season might be different. They might win their bowl next season. That might be the only thing that changes. But I think because they're
Yeah.
going to South Carolina, they're going to Athens.
Well, I'm not
They're
sure. They
playing.
might have went to South Carolina this season.
Was it
Let's do
was
another
it in
check.
Columbia this
Let's
season?
see here. I'll check it real
I
quick
thought it was
because I don't
Tuscaloosa,
want to have my facts too far off right now. That's if it would, do its thing.
but I mean,
Yeah,
I
okay,
think
so it was
expecting.
okay, so it was in Tuscaloosa. So they are going to have to go to
Okay,
Georgia. They're going to have to go to South Carolina. They're going to have to go to Missouri. Um, so
I mean,
they're
I
going to have
think
to go
DeBoer has a
to
similar.
Auburn. And Kalen DeBoer has not coached in Jordan-Hare yet. So keep that in mind,
I mean, the
guys.
Iron
Look
Bowl is
look
a
out for
big
the Iron
is a
Ball
very
next
important
season.
thing.
So
Jordan Hare and the Iron Bowl, but very important. I expect because I try to be more reasonable, and I know spoiled Bama trust fund fans are not going to like the idea of it, but I think it's going to be the same song next season. It's either going to be similar or worse. They're either going to have the
I was
same
about to say
record
it.
or they're going to have a worse record.
I don't
That's how
see it.
that I just that's how the way I see it. And I don't think it's reasonable for Bama fans to expect anything different because he's not Nick Saban. They're kind of in a reset and they're playing the same schedule but with harder locations next
Hmm.
season. So, you know, it's I don't think it's going to be much different. I think
Yeah.
expecting him to jump into the playoffs next season and have a 10-2, 11-1 season is a little ridiculous to expect that even in the second season. But I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying I in a
Yeah.
reasonable sense, I doubt it's gonna be much different. But mentioning DeBoer in Alabama, I have a question because we talk about the 12 team playoff and the NIL and everything. are we just going to see the same big, rich money bag, big name program brands keep winning it regardless? Are we going to keep seeing
We'll
that? You
see. I
think?
mean, Ohio State came out and won it, so let's see.
Nobody likes the Buckeyes except Ohio State fans. Anyway, um, congratulations. You were the best team by far this season.
Yeah.
And congratulations to Ryan Day. Good job on winning that natty. You guys earned it. I mean, you ended up being head and shoulders above the rest by the end of the season. And
Yeah, well, I'm not giving them
congratulations.
congratulations because I don't like you guys. Your fans are the worst. I hate all of you. No, I'm kidding. No,
Congratulations
congratulations,
to Notre
Buckeyes.
Dame too, because we
Yes,
talked a lot of
and
crap
Marcus
about Notre
Freeman.
Dame. Look,
I'm a big
Marcus
Marcus
Freeman and
Freeman
Notre
fan.
Dame, they showed us up. They proved us wrong, which was what they had to do for us to change our tune. You can't be mad that we were singing the song that we were, because until something changed, we had the right to sing that song. And now we're accepting that this season
Yeah.
changed it. They earned their place. They were one of the best teams in the country. They earned their spot in that national title game, and we're eating crow for it. But at the same time, we were still kind of justified beforehand. But maybe we went
Get in
in
a
too hard.
conference,
But
though, or I'm still going to dislike your situation. I like
well, what
Marcus
I was going to
Freeman.
say
You guys
is
were a good team, but get in a conference, or I'm going to continue to complain about your schedules.
right. I mean, as long as you keep engineering your own schedules for success, we're going to still kind of feel the same way. But anyway,
I think
I think
that's
the
a
super
good.
conferences, I think the super conferences will be a good point to, like, a good variable to plug
Yeah.
in whether the same brands keep winning it. Because if we were to go into a super league and there was a bigger pool between the two conferences of like NIL funds and things like that, and more open doors for other programs because of that super league setup, that might be the only way we start seeing big changes.
Mhm.
Because as long as these other lower name, lesser, caliber schools are staying in these same, weaker conferences and playing that, they may never get that opportunity to catch up or compete. Because as we saw with SMU was one of the 12 best teams in the country. They belonged in the playoff, but the stage ended up being too big for them. They weren't ready for it because they aren't that weren't established in a
Well,
crucible of competition. So
we'll
maybe
just have
super
to see.
conferences fix that.
We'll just
I
have to
think that's
see.
the only way
So,
it changes. Otherwise, I think the richest schools and biggest name brands are still going to keep winning it.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, but
So,
if they join that conference, they get a share of the money in the conference. So it's
but
obviously the
that's what
other
I'm
teams are
saying,
without a
right? The
doubt going
Super
to be
League.
better. I guess
So,
that's a good place to end it, though. Talking about the super conference.
anyway,
So
what would you rank this season altogether on a scale of grade A through F to
A through
BS?
F,
BS being the worst. A through BS.
probably.
And we can use plus or minus too.
The thing is that I want to say I want to give it an A based on how the games and everything went, because honestly, but like I said, that just the vibe, the things with like the random transfer portal problems and all, I'm just gonna have to stick with like a B plus on this season until like these NIL and transfer portal problems can be solved. I think we're gonna be sitting at probably B's maximum, because that overshadows the actual like games and stuff, So there's just too many outside problems right now, you know, and it's really
Yeah.
affecting the actual like outcome of the season and all. So that's my ranking as a B plus for it. A it had A tier games, but the
BS
problems
tier
surrounding
culture.
it, and the vibe around it just kind of bring it down to that B plus. So
It's a
still
culture
enjoyed it.
problem. We got to fix the culture problem with college football. Otherwise,
So
we're going to keep having mid seasons.
so that kind of does it, I guess, for our season rundown.
Yeah.
So
I mean, hey, we kind of covered everything that there was a point to cover at this point in the year. As late, I mean, I think what we're three weeks post national title
yes.
game, almost 3 weeks post national title. So,
So yeah.
well, we finished what we started, and that was the goal. So, once again, we plan on making a Georgia specific episode for Georgia fans and Dog Nation, so we can rant about what went right or wrong with Georgia and looking ahead.
And I guess what we can say here is that this will be our last episode of this official preseason, this past season.
Yeah,
But I'm
24,
sure
25 season.
plenty
Yeah.
plenty of other things happen during the off season, and so if big enough things happen where we feel like we have enough to talk about in the off season and really, go through, just like Alabama just recently got a new offensive coordinator and all, just overall things with the off season and big changes, we'll probably make an episode and try and really, you know,
Yeah,
make
we
light
we
of
had
that.
considered.
So
Yeah, we had considered and talked about possibly doing off-season episodes, maybe like once a month. I think it just depends on whether we got something to talk about or not. As he said, like we're not going to follow every detail of the off-season, but if there's something significant we think to talk about or that comes up,
yeah,
we might talk about it. And uh, it also might give us some time to kind of polish up the podcast and the way we do things. Because I mean, this is just something we just started doing just for fun, just uh, amateur analysts, but also objectively correct professionals, although we're consistently inconsistent. Um, it is just for fun. So,
yeah.
everybody out there who subscribed and watched, we hope you enjoyed following us throughout the season as, inconsistently consistent as we tried to be. But yeah.
Yep. Thanks for following us. And if you're new, thanks for tuning in for this first episode, especially if you've made it this far. So yeah, thanks for watching. We'll get that Georgia rundown podcast for the Georgia fans that watch us or will end up watching us. Maybe
Yeah.
so we'll talk about that. And so
Georgia fans like to complain, so I think if we make one about Georgia fans complaining, then we
well, it doesn't
probably
help the
get.
fact that here's the thing. I get it. We don't have too much to complain about because of how our seasons have went lately. But the biggest thing is that now that's the thing is that it's made it more to complain about because our problems in the past that prevented us from getting to where we're at now are now back as the problems that are preventing us from getting back, getting to where we need to be. So,
But also, we
anyways,
saw things that were completely historically uncharacteristic of Georgia football
that
this
too.
season
So,
under Kirby Smart. So that's crazy.
plenty to
But
talk
anyway,
about.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about
So,
all that. But also, speaking of the timing, hopefully, if we continue to do this podcast and polish it up, get better at, being objectively correct professionals, hopefully we will do better with timing and the episodes. We learned a lot throughout the season of doing these podcasts, and
doesn't look like we've learned a thing because every episode has somehow been well over an hour.
well, the thing about it is, I mean, it is a podcast. We are riffing off it's off script riffing, so it is what it is. There's a lot to talk about, especially when we have so many gaps in between
Yeah.
things to talk about. It builds up, but anyway, I mean, the point is, we had gone doing this so long for this long. We, might as well just commit to the hour-long mark. But point is that if we continue doing the podcast, we plan to make more short, concise episodes, more consistent, concise episodes. I think we've got a lot of notes to take from after this season. But anyway, this has been Post Natty Clarity, aka Brother Cam, and
Marcus Paidman, getting paid as the Notre Dame head coach now, and also known as Chase. So,
Mickey, you have anything else you want to say about this podcast and the way football's going right now?
no, and I'm not doing the voice again. That's all they got beginning of the episode.
They're great people. They deserve better. How could you? All right.
Well,
Anyway, this has been the Talk-Ons summation conclusion of the 2024-2025 college football season. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe. Look out for more
thanks
that
for
might be
watching.
coming. Thanks for watching. Yeah, so yeah. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Nobody likes the suckers.